Coming up, since Mikal Bridges put on a uniform in Brooklyn for the Nets, he is quickly establishing himself as an ascending star in the NBA. We break down why and how high he can take this team moving forward, all coming up next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, my friends, it is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. I'm Adam Armbrecht, not only breaking down your Brooklyn Nets, but also the New York Football Giants on the One Giant podcast with my boy Andy Mack, and your New Jersey Devils on the Devils Puck Luck podcast with Danny McDonough. We thank you, of course, for making us your first listen of the day. We're free on all those great platforms. And remind you, today's episode is going to be brought to you by Prize Picks. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code Locked On. That's prizepicks.com, promo code Locked On. And Doug, if he were here, would tell us that we will talk about this 102-86 win over the Charlotte Hornets in totality. But the most important thing to discuss is the performance of Mikal Bridges, not just in this game, but since becoming a Brooklyn Net. And a game like tonight, where the Nets got out to the early lead, controlled this thing throughout, a 19-point first quarter performance from Mikal is very much a cementing performance from him. We'll discuss what Charlotte is and why you need to have a game like this as a team in total. But when you take away the two superstars that the Brooklyn Nets had before the deadline, Kyrie Irving, Kevin Durant, we can say their names, and you're left with all of these parts. And Doug and I just finished discussing. Doug did a great job covering, obviously, the massive comeback win over the Boston Celtics on Friday night. But when you take away all these parts, you start to look around and say, we have talented players, but do they all fit together? We have talented pieces, but can a player like Mikal Bridges play at the highest possible level if you don't have the number two or even better number one over top of him on this team? And what we're learning in short order is that yes, he can. He can identify himself as the leader of this team. He can be someone that on a night in, night out basis is going to be able to get to his spots, perform consistently, and then afford other players off of him, just like when you have the superstars that we know as known commodities right now in the NBA, to have success, to stick to their roles, and to thrive based on what defenses either have to respect around Mikal Bridges' game or learn through trial and error, or error in this instance tonight. Big part about this, too, is welcome everybody in on the YouTube Live. Always reminding you can catch us live on the post-game coverage on YouTube. And then, of course, the podcast feed the following morning. Stick around for a few extra minutes here tonight, but it's Sunday, and we like to get ourselves a little bit of shut-eye. So the other big thing about Mikal Bridges, not just in this game, but since joining the Brooklyn Nets, is twofold. First, we go ahead and just look inside this particular performance here against the Charlotte Hornets, where, again, the thing that I've been enjoying watching from him now over these last few games, and it's been building steadily, by the way, when he first comes in, we are wondering, the minutes are building and Jacque Vaughn's trying to sort things out. And then even as the minutes build, there's instances, several games, where Mikal Bridges is your second or third or fourth in terms of volume of shots that he's able to put up. But as we've been saying with consistency too, there's a lot to figure out on this roster before you can really feel like you can cement roles. So in tonight's game, 19 points in the first quarter, we all get that. Plays 41 minutes, another 30-plus point performance. Finishes with 33, gives you 12 of 21 from the field. That is going to be leading all shooters. Spencer Dinwiddie with 19 just in behind him. 2 for 4 from beyond the arc controlled. Another big thing that came out of this game in the last few games for Mikal Bridges, 7 of 8 at the line. We discussed how one of the features of Cam Thomas was that he brings this ability to get to the line consistently, to force the defense to foul, right? Get some of those free points at the line. Mikhail has also been doing that. Gives you 8 rebounds to go along with it, a couple of assists, plus 14 on the night. A lot of people are going to be plus here. Nicholas Claxton, however, in 27 minutes was not. We probably won't bother dwelling on that too much on a game like this. That now stands to tell you that over these last handful of games for Mikhail, the win over Boston, that required a 38-point performance from him, 13 of 22, from the field in that game. He had what we could call a quiet game. And guess what? Against the Knicks, where they lost 30 minutes, the game got out of hand there, obviously, just 21 points. But then you go back to the loss to Milwaukee, where he again put up 31. The point being here is, since becoming a Brooklyn Net, he's a 50-40-90 guy. Matter of fact, he's actually a 50-50-90 guy. That they create a whole new category to represent what he's been doing since joining the Brooklyn Nets. And he is on this now pace, including tonight's game. He's been averaging almost 35 minutes. Right now, it has him at 26, but those numbers, I think, are going to continue to go up here as we're seeing the way these roles are getting defined on this roster. Knocking down 53.6 from the field, 50 from beyond the arc on the nose, and 91% at the line. And one of the things that I thought about when he comes in and you consider the idea of what is it going to look like differently, he's playing off of other higher profile stars, obviously in Phoenix. And you wonder if you're going to see either a diminish or an elevation of what the quality of his play could be. There's a reason why he was the sticking point, as speculated going back to the summertime and the Kevin Durant potential deal to Phoenix, and why the new owner immediately pulled the trigger to give him up, because this is the guy the Brooklyn Nets wanted to get. But what I find fascinating about it is, like, you go back to Phoenix days, he's averaging 36 and 35 minutes over the last 2 seasons there. The volume of shooting, 10 attempts per game, over 13 attempts per game last year, to start this season. A lot of that came with the absence of other players like Booker, Chris Paul dealing with some things, not the same shooting performances from him game over game. So his role is elevated. But in these last 2, and even go back to 2021, when he's averaging a little over 9 shots per game, the from the field numbers have been there. The field goal percentage is 54-53, but it came down a little bit in this season in Phoenix when the role was elevated, when a little bit more was being asked of him. The other thing that's happened here since coming over to Brooklyn, he was in 56 games this year with Phoenix, averaging almost 5 3-pointers per game at about 38-39%. He's averaging 50 on 5 from the field since joining Brooklyn. So that, there's no real way to quantify that, but we will talk about the difference of what the Nets are doing here and how their offense is running and why that can provide some opportunities for him. And then the other thing, just from a career trajectory, this is a guy who, going back to when he came into the league, 80% from the free throw line, 84, 83. Then all of a sudden this year, even time in Phoenix, now carrying over a 90% guy from the line. Those numbers matter. And the sheer volume of it has gone up too, as his minutes have elevated. But he was playing almost 30 minutes in his rookie season when he came into the league, only getting to the line a little over once per contest across 30 minutes. Now, averaging 34 this season. Right now, he's getting to the line 6 times with Brooklyn. He was only getting to the line 3 times in Phoenix. And again, it's all predicated on what's being run there, what the offense is being driven towards. We are now seeing that when you are building an offense around and you are saying, Mikal Bridges, you are the engine for this Brooklyn Nets team, can you? Yes, you can play at an incredibly high level at a very consistent rate. Now, it's the Charlotte Hornets tonight, and wins and losses matter when we talk about how good these stat lines can look. But being a 50-40-90 guy is rarefied air in the NBA. We know Kyrie did it recently. We know that Brogdon did it going back. We know that you got guys like Larry Legend in the mix. I think it's 4 times for Steve Nash. Tragically, from Brooklyn Nets perspective, he may have been a 50-40-90 guy multiple times in his career as a player, but he was more of like a 5-7-3 as a head coach. So that didn't work out so much on the bench. But 11 total players, I think it's less at the NBA level. I looked up the stat before with G League taken into account, which should never be the case anyway. But you're in such a rare class now, though, over 9 games. Can you do it over the remainder of the schedule? Can you play to that level with consistency, including when you go up against more difficult matchups? And can you be a guy that the Nets can at least look at and say, next season when we go into the year, this is a guy that's pushing to be an all-star. He was already making a case for himself in the absence of some players in Phoenix, just didn't quite have maybe enough time to get there on it. You're going to be a consistent all-star contender? Are you going to be a guy that's consistently in and around this type of stat line, game over game, season over season? If so, we can start to dream around the pieces that you want to put around it. We know the Nets are an incomplete roster right now. But these are games, these are performances, and this is a player that the Brooklyn Nets, Sean Marks, believed was a star waiting to come out from underneath some other higher profile guys. And so far, he is proving that with consistency, game over game for the Brooklyn Nets, including tonight, most importantly, in a second straight victory. Coming up here in a second, we'll talk about the game. What did the Brooklyn Nets do so well to start this one? Why is a game against a bad team like the Charlotte Hornets so important to come out and play this way? And what can they expect to carry over to another very winnable game in Houston? Before we do that, though, my friends, I gotta let you know, you heard us at the top talking about Prize Picks. And you may be wondering why. Simple reason. It's because we know that Prize Picks makes the easy battle of trying to get in on that fantasy action. You don't have to go against the Sharks and everything. Very simple. Prize Picks wants you to make it easy. How does it work? Pick 2 to 6 players. And if they score more or less than their projections, you win. You can win up to 25 times your money on that as well. There's no competing against the odds. There's no competing against the Sharks. Just you against the projections available. Prize Picks offers projections on any sport as well. That includes the NBA, as you would assume. And by the way, take projections on Mikal Bridges, be taking the over. When you're looking at his numbers, say, I want the over on him. When you're looking at like Cam Johnson made threes, more than likely you can take the over. When you're thinking about blocks for Nicholas Claxton, you can usually take the over, as he's been one of the best in the league this season. But also NFL when that comes back around. MLB about to kick off. NHL pushing towards the playoff. PGA, college football, men's college basketball, women's college basketball. You get the idea. It's all the sports that you want to bet on, including esports, NASCAR, tennis, MMA, and boxing as well. Even disc golf. I'm a disc golfer. I disc golf. I wonder if anyone's surprised to hear that. But you can also bet on that over on Prize Picks. You download Prize Picks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code Locked On. You deposit $100, you get $100. You deposit $50, you get $50. Every time you say one number in your deposit, you're going to get the same number for free, matching up to $100. Don't forget to enter promo code Locked On at sign up for your instant deposit match up to $100. Okay. So now let's just rewind ourselves here back a step to this game and what the Brooklyn Nets accomplished in a game that they should 100% be winning. So Doug did a great job, as I said, on the post game covering the Celtics comeback. One of the best. I mean, this is a team that has had some of the worst losses in franchise history and some of the biggest comebacks in franchise history, in NBA history, all in the same season, all over a handful of weeks. You go back and look at the schedule. It's such a violent pendulum that we live on with this team. And as Doug was glowing about that game, it's so funny that just the episode before, we're talking about, hey, we got to look at this team, see what's possible for them. They're moving towards the rebuild. Yes, there's pieces that we really like, but there's just a reality to what they can accomplish. And then they go out and get that win. But coming into today, I very clearly knew that if it was anything other than the game that we got from the Brooklyn Nets overall today, it was going to be pretty frustrating because the Charlotte Hornets are not a good team. Plain and simple. And while we have seen, and we've kind of talked about this on a game-to-game basis, the teams that they've been playing against and kind of where they are in the hierarchy right now of the NBA. They haven't had the layup game yet, which is what this is, or the game that they're going to have when they play Houston as well. A 20-46 team right now following this loss. No LaMelo Ball, as we know. It's a bad team. And the one difference here that I thought was important when we think about the Brooklyn Nets and where their games have been since the trade, Mikal Bridges has performed in 9, couple extra there, obviously, in behind it. But just go back and think, the 4-game losing streak, okay, it's the Chicago Bulls. They haven't had a great season, but they made a marginal move, right? They got Pat Bev. They're a good team, or at least the talent on paper tells you that they are a good team. You lose to them, a buzzer beater to the Hawks, another good team pushing for the playoffs, the Bucks, the Knicks are on a winning streak right now, and they lost to the Knicks prior to that Miami Heat win, the 76ers, and we know some were closer, some were worse, whatever. But this is the first opportunity since we've come out of this trade and this team has started to get its rhythm where we could say, where are you in the landscape of the NBA? Because we know when you look at the standings and we see where the Nets are and you hear them on the broadcast talk about this is what this team has done over the course of this season in close games, fourth quarters, etc. None of those things matter because that's not the team that's playing right now for Brooklyn. So they sit there in the 6th seed right now, but you've lost games to the teams ahead of you in New York and in Milwaukee. You've lost and won games against Miami, but you've lost to the Hawks. Right? You've lost to Chicago, who's out of the playoffs right now, a 29-36 team. And that's the first one where you go, hey, that raises an eyebrow because whatever they are on paper, they have not been on the court this year. But Charlotte's a bad team. Second worst team in the Eastern Conference, 20-46. You got to beat this team up. You have to. You have to get out to an early lead. You have to be able to bury them and make it feel like whatever our ceiling is, there's a very clear floor. And we define that as saying, hey, this is a team we believe is in the play-in, sometimes an 8 seed if you just took this team going forward. And a game like this confirms that. Specifically, inside of this matchup, I just thought the first thing that you'll love about it, again, based on who you're playing against, is not coming out of a first quarter, just like in Boston, which is why you had to have the big comeback, giving up a monster quarter. This game has a lot of good plus matchups for the Brooklyn Nets too. Like the Gordon Haywards of the world are not going to be taking a lot of people off the dribble. You're not going to have a lot of, bad matchups defensively. You're going to be able to keep a lot of guys in front of you. You're not going to get beat up even when Joe Harris comes in for stretches or when you want to bring in Cam Thomas. There's not going to be a lot of, attacking switches where you say, gosh, we're just really in a bad way here. And the bigs for the Hornets, while functional, are not refined players by any stretch. So they're not necessarily going to beat you up in that regard. They did beat up Cam Johnson a little bit, got that bloody nose, and found himself, he went out and came back into this one, went to the locker room, came back, and was still just like a faucet after catching an elbow in the paint defensively. But this is one where, including the 33-point performance for Mikhail, but you look inside the box score here, and there's a lot of things that worked really well for them. Spencer Dinwiddie is your number 2 scorer right now as this roster is constructed. You get a solid, not perfect performance from Cam Johnson in 35 minutes, just 3 of 13 from the field. The reason why you can say it's a solid, not a perfect performance is because he can do things defensively for you. Dorian Finney-Smith, who's had better games recently, but only goes 1 of 5 from deep tonight and 2 of 8 from the field and gives you 5 points. But he can play 33 minutes and still have success because of what he can do defensively against a team like Charlotte. And then when you go into the bench, there's only going to be 4 total double-digit scores in this game. And the last one's going to be Joe Harris, who, of course, Joe is going to give you 4 or 6 from beyond the arc and 12 points. All the shooting that he did, and he did it perfectly. This is the example of being able to hang your hat on the defensive end against a bad team and then exploit space. So just bringing it right back to Mikal Bridges, because the Brooklyn Nets put up 102, and he accounts for 30. What's the math on that? Yeah, little 32%, 31, 32% of the scoring for the team. Why? Because you have enough talent and enough perimeter shooting that needs to be respected on the offensive end that Mikal Bridges can continue to lean into what is something that we usually hold for some of the best players in the league. The NBA is predicated on 3-point shots, but Mikal Bridges is very capable, and we'll discuss coming up here in a second, of leaning into the mid-range game and leaning into with authority. Something I didn't think that we would talk about in the same way that we once did around Kyrie Irving or Kevin Durant or the best players in the league. And I'm not comparing any of them and Mikal Bridges, but the shooting performances that he can put out there with consistency is what's going to be the engine for this team on the offensive end. And I'll break down why coming up here in a moment. But before we talk about that coming up here in a moment, we'll also talk about what Mikal Bridges may want to reach for after a performance like this and several performances like this. He's going to need, over the back half of this season, some Built Bars. And that's because you know that while we don't know how Built Bar makes the bar so darn tasty, tasting like candy bar while also having amazing macros, it really doesn't matter because they're incredible and they're healthy for you with stats like only 130 calories and just 4 grams of sugar, a whopping 17 grams of protein. And now, as we've told you, you say you got to go to built.com, and you still can. You can only go to built.com, not anymore. You find yourself by a Walmart, you find yourselves by a Sam's Club, you go ahead and walk right in those doors. If you head over to Walmart today, you go to the pharmacy section, you grab yourself a box of the Built Bars, you can pick up a 4-bar box, of cookies and cream, double chocolate, or coconut puffs. Walking by a Sam's Club, go in, say hi to Sam, and then you want to go ahead and grab a 13-bar box with the hit flavors, brownie, batter, and churro. Go ahead and pick up your Built Bars at Built.com, Sam's Club, or Walmart. And yeah, you can go ahead and thank me later. The other thing you can thank me later for is something that I wish I had been more bullish about when Doug and I were discussing Mikal Bridges coming in. So I want to get into this mid-range conversation, but we also know that Mikhail is moving the needle in terms of the points that he's putting up here. And Doug and I were having, not a debate, the discussion around, well, where would he be? If I said, hey, he can be a third, I think he can be a 30-point scorer. And I'm not going to plant my flag that there's not going to be lesser nights, games where they still win and he puts up 24, whatever it may be. But when you look over right now across the NBA, as Doug had pointed out previously, if he's going to score 29 points or more, he's going to be a top 10 scorer in the league. But it's even worth noting that if he can be a 26-point scorer in the league, that's going to be good for top 17. That's going to be in the Zion Williamson, Anthony Davis, Jaylen Brown territory. And I legitimately believe that what we're seeing from him, while maybe the 50, 40, 90 is not going to be a season-long possibility for him with consistency. I don't know, though. It at least has to be possible since he's performing this way. And we'll have 18 more games to go here where they can figure out if he can play at this high of a level night in, night out, and independent of what the defensive matchups are going to be. But speculating on him being a 27-point scorer, which would make him a top 12, top 13 guy, right there with Kyrie, with someone who's having some issues of his own right now, John Morant, but Devin Booker, Donovan Mitchell, that's the territory that Mikal Bridges is trying to insert himself into. And when you go and you watch this game and we talk about his box score, 4 3-point attempts. This is not a guy that has to survive from beyond the arc. He's hitting it at a very high clip. He can do it with consistency, and that matters greatly. But inside of a team like this, when you have a Cam Johnson, and to whatever, Spencer Dinwiddie, who's a bit of a chucker, but he can run hot. You have Dorian Finney-Smith, who has elevated his perimeter game. You have someone like Royce O'Neal coming off the bench, who at least early this season really took that step forward. Whatever Joe Harris is now, when he's available. The point being is you still have enough quality perimeter players here that you saw in tonight's game. They're staying at home on their defensive assignments. Now, it'll be fascinating to see what teams choose to do against Mikal going forward. Do they try to take him off the board and say, can enough players punish you consistently enough that we have to then back off and respect the totality of the team and not focus in on one single source? But Mikal had 21 total shot attempts and 17 were inside the arc. The mid-range game, his 18th and 19th points at the end of the first quarter were, by the way, working down to the lane, down to the baseline, and he had a leaning fadeaway 2-point mid-range jumper over 2 defenders. I talked about this with Matt Brooks when we had that crossover episode going back a couple weeks, and Matt pointed out, when you look at the film study on him, the tape, Mikal holds that ball high. He said not the same motion, but not dissimilar to the way Kevin Durant is in terms of the release. He has the length, so he's very rarely going to be in a spot where his mid-range shots, even with congestion, are going to be disrupted by defenders. As long as he has that little bit of airspace, he's going to be able to knock it down with consistency. The way in which that I think we talk about different players, and let's talk about the guys that have been here. Right? When Kyrie Irving wants to turn on the Jets, he wants to push that pace. We used to talk about it relative to James Harden when he was here. Yes, Harden will push the pace, but Kyrie wants to push the pace. Kevin Durant is a guy that can play brilliantly in the open court, can play brilliantly in any form. But when you get down into half-court sets, he's a guy that can just navigate to his space and be effective in that mid-range game, be effective from beyond the arc, be effective in ISOs, be effective over double teams. Mikhail is showing you that he can find the pockets when the spacing is correct, when you have the talent around him. And by the way, if we just talk about in team totality, this starting lineup, I'll give a big tip of the cap here, because this is a Mikal kind of Bridges celebration for me, because he's moving in that right direction, because he can showcase what he's capable of over the remainder of the season for the Brooklyn Nets fan base going forward, and thinking about what's the other piece we need to add here. But big tip of the cap to Spencer Dinwiddie, a guy that was both the second highest point scorer by a significant margin, only guy over 20 points after Mikhail, and also was a guy that gave you 8 assists and gave you 8 rebounds and was 3 of 4 at the line when he got there. Struggled from deep. I always wish that Spencer Dinwiddie would take a few less shots, but also a couple of late shot clock chuckers, because he is somewhat of that bailout guy. Dorian Finney-Smith threw one to him late in the clock because it's, hey, here we are, and Dinwiddie has at least showcased that range. So 9 of 19 from the field for Spencer Dinwiddie tonight, but take away the perimeter shooting, and he's a guy that goes 6 of 9 from the field. So having that consistency and having Spencer Dinwiddie evolve himself a little bit here to what his role needs to be. As Mikal Bridges continues to emerge, Spencer Dinwiddie needs to look at him, understand that that's what he is, and know that his number one, when he's on the court, needs to be, as much as possible, helping to set up and facilitate number one, Mikal Bridges in this instance. And then no, when it's time for you to turn it on, it's time for you to turn it on, Spencer. When it's time to get downhill and attack, yes. But the Nets did a great job in this game. Floor spacing, extra passes. There was a lot of sequences where I thought, all the way down to Seth Curry coming in off the bench, working to the left elbow, the double team comes over, step through that second defender, and even if it's not to go attack at the basket or pull up on a mid-range shot, Seth had a couple of sequences. Nice little bounce pass around the back of the defender, put it back out to the top of the key. Spencer Dinwiddie, Mikal Bridges, Cam Johnson, allow them then to reset, reorchestrate, because now you got 2 defenders coming to the left. It means you're weak somewhere else. And while the Nets right now don't have that consistent down low presence that we want, we'll talk about Nerlens Noel and the impending signing and joining this roster and what that means as a backup center. But you need to be able to continue to make the right basketball play, the smart basketball play. And that, I think, is what they're preaching right now in Brooklyn. Let's play consistent. Let's play smart. Let's, in a lot of ways, let's be fundamental first and then be sexy second, right? Listen, we're not getting those spectacular jaw-dropping moments the way that you do with the Lukas of the world, LeBron, Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, all these guys. Great. But what you're getting is jaw-dropping performances in terms of the team. Like, the team is giving you those, at least in this game and in the game against Boston. And the one irony that I will very comfortably point out here is that the one thing that has not changed for the Brooklyn Nets since the trade and since the departure of the Stars and the new version of this team, they never fail to not allow you to ever fully get a grasp on what it is. What is this team? What can they be? We were just talking about how these bad losses, these big deficits, these horrible first quarters, even on Friday night, the game that they won, another 37-point first quarter. But now they've strung 2 together, and now they'll go play a bad team in Houston, and then they go on the road for 5 games, and there's going to be more clunkers mixed in here. And I always try to remind myself when we have these moments on the show, you got to try to be even-keeled. This episode, Mikal Bridges, that conversation is about a guy that is putting together a 50-40-90 line, and it's okay to get excited about what he can be and about how they can construct this roster with very much him in mind as being that key centerpiece. And maybe they'll never have the elite one of one, have 1 or 2 of the top 12 or 15 guys, or have 1 of the top 3 guys on this roster. The 2 guys that you think are sniffing around top 10, top 15 talents, if they continue to scratch those surfaces, if they find that second player, if they add that next piece, yeah, you can dream on this team being very competitive consistently. And that's still the missing ingredient here. That's still going to be what we talk about going forward. Consistency. And for all the great performances from Mikhail, you still need everybody else to play their role and find ways to get victories. This box score by itself would not necessarily have held up against a lot of other teams around this league. But when it's the Charlotte Hornets, hang your hat on the defense, hang your hat on some of your best players, some of your best scores on the offensive end, get a victory, move on. And that's exactly what we're going to do. You come back in here, the Brooklyn Nets, as a reminder, stick around for a few minutes on YouTube, have a conversation with you over there. Hopefully it's a lot of positive vibes, man. Sometimes they're violent and negative. The last 2 games, it's been positive. It's been good times in Brooklyn, and that's what we're excited about. Coming up for the Brooklyn Nets, as I mentioned, though, they're going to have Houston up here next. We'll get into this week, Noel, what that means to have a legitimate backup center. What do we think his role can be offensively and defensively? What does it mean in terms of Ben Simmons? Got more information, still inflammation there for him. Obviously, the addition of Noel is an indicator around Day'Ron Sharpe. So we'll flesh that out a little bit more here as we go forward. But when it comes to just looking at the schedule and where we go from here, the Brooklyn Nets will have Houston coming up here on Tuesday night. And then I said that's the start of actually the 5-game road trip will be Tuesday night all the way through the 14th. And it includes teams that are going to be good tests, great tests. The Bucks, the Timberwolves, the Nuggets, OKC, a team that's been playing better, obviously. And you can keep rolling right on through a very difficult stretch when this team gets back home for 3 games, back with the Denver Nuggets again, and a back-to-back at home there with the Cleveland Cavaliers. So things aren't going to get easier. That's why we enjoy this. That's why we start to look at Mikhail and the numbers he's putting up and what it can mean going forward. Because it's more than just this game and it's more than just this season. It's what this franchise is going to try to accomplish over the next handful of months as we think forward and around some of these stars that can be so successful. We thank everybody, man. If you were in here for the live post game, awesome. The other thing that you do, you go over to YouTube. You subscribe if you're not subscribed. You turn on the alerts so you know when we're going live on the post games. You get that podcast where we get those needs fulfilled. And it's easy. It's free, but it means the world to us. We always talk about how much we appreciate seeing the numbers move, continue to grow in subscribers, supporters, and all the conversations we have over on YouTube and over on Twitter, at Adam Armbrecht, at Doug Norrie, at Locked On Nets. It's great. It really is about being completely a part of the Brooklyn Nets community and hopefully having really good conversations with you all about this team. So you do all those things, it means the world. And as always, when Doug is not here, there is no quote short of saying, I miss my friend. And I can't wait till he's back here so we can keep talking all things Brooklyn Nets basketball. That, my friends, is the Post Podcast Podcast. Or this is the Post Podcast Podcast. That was just the podcast. If you're over on YouTube, shout it out at Locked On Nets. We'll scroll through. I'll take a look at it. It'll be a little bit of mild delay as I don't have the other guy here. I'll refer to Doug from now on as the other guy. Having the opportunity to have him scroll through some of these as well. But you know the deal. If you shout out at Locked On, I'll get a look at them, and I will hopefully get some of these up here. Good to see where everybody is, how they're feeling about this team. And it's a good win. It's what you want. You wanted a win. You wanted a win that felt very much in control. Brooklyn gave that to you. Brandon, frequent flyer. What do you think the plan is for Cam Thomas? He can be a legitimate superstar, but he isn't getting a lot of time. Are they gradually progressing him like they did with Claxton? Yeah. I mean, this is a good example. When we talked about he's deserving of minutes, you believe that he can be a part of this team, of a successful team going forward. And then you go in and you think about looking at these stats here for the Nets and for Cam Thomas. And over the last 2 games, as much as we believe that he can be successful, what have we seen? Cam Thomas in these last 2 games has given you 7 minutes and 7 minutes. 2 of 4 from the field tonight, 0 of 4 against Boston. What's the big difference? The team won those games. And we mentioned about how Jacques Vaughn can be, it's a little disingenuous to go back and say, hey, those big 40-point performances, but we lost those. Well, there wasn't really anybody else, right? So it wasn't this team sense of it. But when you think about now this recent streak, the Knicks game being the outlier, we're in 24 minutes, 6 of 13. It was a good game from him from a scoring perspective, quiet from beyond the arc. But you go back and you see, right? 23 minutes against Milwaukee, 0 of 7. Strings together a few good games against Atlanta, Chicago, and going back to Miami. They lose 2 out of 3 of those. So, yeah, I believe that, yes, I think that they want to bring him along. They want to develop him. They want him to understand the total game he needs to play. And we said this. I think he's already shown. The game has already evolved. He's already playing a little bit smarter. Even in a game like tonight, those 7 minutes, my eyes always perk up when he steps on the court. If he's not seeing a big minute size, he played it smart. There was a great sequence where he gets the ball at the top of the key. He moves out to the right side. He dribbles inside the arc a little bit, just draws a little of the attention of the defender, and then kicks it cross court to the left wing for an opportunity. He had an assist in this game. He had a couple of rebounds, assist in the last game, excuse me. But he facilitated that, right? It just, I think we have to just compartmentalize our brains around this idea that he needs to play. And I've said it, right? He should be playing 25 minutes. Maybe he should. The games when they lose and he doesn't play as much, it's frustrating. The games when he doesn't play that much and they win, it is what it is. But I think he'll get there. It's just a matter of time. Let's see what else we got going on here. And shout out to everybody. I see Hey Bluzz in here. I see Brendan's in here. I see Brad is in here. Is Ben going to be a next season project? He may work better with Nerlens Noel with his outside shooting rather than Nick Claxton and be a backup point guard. I don't know. I mean, let's just be frank. There's inflammation now. This move with Noel feels like it's the safeguard from what you don't feel like Day'Ron Sharpe is ready to do just yet and what Noel can provide for you, obviously. I don't know. It'd be disingenuous for me to say that, like, next year, this is what Ben Simmons will be. Now, if you want to believe, and I believe that there is very much physical things that have impacted him all season long, and then there's the whole other side of the mental game or just the attitude or desire to expand certain areas, and he's been in the league a long time and hasn't necessarily been able to do that. It's a wait and see for me. What happens in the offseason? How good does he look? And I think we'll know. We'll know pretty early, first of all, just from an organizational standpoint, because you'll hear the messaging on it. And then we'll see. We'll see what it looks like physically. He's never, very rare glimpses, a handful of possessions this entire year has flashed anything truly reminiscent of what he is at the peak of his ability. So until I see it on the court, it's probably just folly to speculate on it. But it's 1,000% going to be one of the most looming conversations over this team because of the financial money that they're committed to with him and the fact that they can't just dollar for dollar go out, right? They save a lot of money, a lot of luxury tax money comes back in. Cam Johnson is going to be looking for the extension this offseason. The Nets are going to give him that. Spencer Dinwiddie's money may come off, but if you could get off of Ben's money, regardless of even if he was going to be playing at the best of his abilities, and we're able to then go add something else, that's going to be something I think that this team definitely explores. Oh, what else do we got up here tonight? I see Al Mack in the house. Good to see you, sir. There's Dewan, excuse me. Do you think Trae Young can be a solution for us? Simmons, Thomas, and 4 picks will land him. I don't think it hurts. Yeah. I think targeting any player of that, of that level, right? We don't just speculate about what's going to go on at Atlanta or any team, right? Where it feels like a point guard is maybe any players on their way out or isn't working. Let's put it that way, right? Atlanta retooled on the fly. Now they went and brought in a new head coach and gave him a big extension. They're going to try to figure things out. If you said, if I took you at your word that Simmons, Thomas, and 4 picks gets the job done, and you now have that starting nucleus that includes Trae Young, Mikal Bridges, Cam Johnson, Nicholas Claxton. You can speculate around where would Spencer Dinwiddie be. So we've even had this conversation, right? Not knowing what the trade would have been if they knew that they were going to move Kevin Durant. Spencer Dinwiddie, he could still be the perfect guy to be your point guard off the bench and leading that second unit. What I'm curious about, I think the best part about this question is what are the Brooklyn Nets going to do in this offseason? Are they ready to go right back into the package up assets and go get a star and put them into the mix here? Or do they want to take maybe even just another year, knowing that you're going to have the draft? How high will you be in the draft? What players are you going to target there, and how do they come in? Or do you want to have Cam Thomas be a part of this team, or do you think you can move him? And what can that turn into, right? So next season could still very much be about, let's continue to refine this roster. Let's add in a draft class, maybe a player, and let's see what we look like, and what the flexibility is. Let's figure out the Ben Simmons situation. If you, it's maybe painful from a Brooklyn Nets fan perspective, but if you're patient and think about next year being, let's see what this team is over the course of a full season, or even all the way to a deadline, and then let that inform what we know we need to add to this team. I think that can be a healthy way to do it, and I think there's some world where the Nets look at it that way. Brendan back in the mix. I think we need to develop him better defensively and just make him more of a consistent player. Yeah, again, if we're talking about Cam Thomas, we'll put it plain. Defense is about effort. That's at the highest level. The superstars in this league can play elite level defense if they're really committed on it. Kyrie Irving has never been a great defender, but you see, because he's athletic enough, quick enough, right? Smart enough as a basketball player to fight over and under screens, to stay in the hip pocket of people, that he can dig his heels in and be effective defensively for stretches. Cam Thomas at his size, always going to be a bit of an issue. And there's certain guys, when you get to a certain level as a scorer, I'm not saying Cam's there yet with consistency, where it's just, hey, my offensive game is what the value is, right? So you need to put other guys around me. And guess what? The Nets have a lot of nice, strong, high-level defenders on this team. But my point being is, like, developing him as a defender, I'm sure they're telling him that's what he needs to do. They're also telling him he needs to develop as a facilitator, develop as a consistent all-around player. And if you read behind what we don't know for sure, but all these veiled comments or the commentary from Jacques Vaughn around him just seems to be indicative of there's just things that he's not doing to a level that we're willing to say, you are now a 25-minute every single night guy. You're in the rotation. There's a reason why Royce O'Neal gets minutes, Seth Curry gets minutes, Joe Harris gets minutes, right? There's a reason why they're going to these guys, because they can't allocate. They don't feel like they can allocate with consistency the minutes to Cam. Doesn't mean it's right or wrong. It's just, that's just what it is. That's what the sample size is telling us. Anybody else have any other thoughts? I guess I'm way behind the timeline here, so I'm kind of giving a little bit of a backtrack here. I thought I saw something. Oh, there's Habla. Let's see here. What are my opinions on Seth and Yuta's minutes? My opinion is that I love Yuta Watanabe. My opinion is that Seth Curry shouldn't have been on this team after the deadline. Now, again, we talked about this before the Celtics game. It doesn't change the opinion of it, as I get a little bit tied up here since we're in a post-podcast, I'll get my mic cord untangled. He shouldn't have been on this team. Doug, very quickly pointed that out the second that we got to the deadline. Expiring contract, guy over 30, shouldn't be on this roster. Injury may have played a factor. So I'd rather Cam Thomas be getting those minutes. If it's just if we're talking 1-to-1, there's guys that are more deserving of getting minutes, and more deserving is the wrong word, that will benefit more. The team will benefit more, one way or the other, from other guys getting minutes. Now, when you go inside this game, and we finally got Yuta late in this one, specifically when it comes to Yuta, I am a little bit confused about why he's been buried. Now, we said episode before the post game against the Celtics that he also has had some back problems. So he gets in the game tonight for 6 minutes at the back end of it. Gets a couple shots up. I'll be curious what it's going to look like if that had been something that was really keeping him out, and he was scratch in a couple of games, wasn't even available. If that's really just the unfortunate timing of the trade deadline and some injuries for him and all these new players, that just kind of took him out of the rotation. But in a perfect world, Jacques Vaughn and the Nets would like to use him and would like to eat into Seth Curry's minutes. And even though Joe had a good game tonight in 18 minutes, obviously, but you're talking about, 30 minutes between those, 30 plus minutes between those two players. And whatever's the state of Cam Thomas, I think Yuta Watanabe can have a role. Very much so. He's consistent enough on the defensive end that he can provide that opportunity to be able to use him for what he had done well for big stretches this year, knock down corner threes. And again, he's probably a guy too. At his age, he can be right in the fold here, 27 years old. He can be in the mix for being a part of this roster going forward. And maybe they already feel like they know what they have in him, for better or worse, keeping him or not, moving on from him now because it's a different version of the team, or being intentional around wanting him back and wanting him to be a part of this. And they don't feel pressured to force the issue here, especially if he's dealing with a back injury. We know that the team is historically overly cautious around injuries. So I'll be fascinated to see what happens with him down the stretch here, because I just think that if it was me, I'd like some consistent minutes for Cam Thomas. I would like more minutes for Yuta Watanabe. I don't need to see Seth Curry at all. And I know people will say, Joe Harris is a shell of himself, but it looks like if you don't play him too often, and you just ask him to take 3-pointers, there's a world where he still has that low level back end of the rotation value for you. So it'll be interesting to see how it unfolds. The Seth Curry minutes, though, they're just irritating because it's not developing anything for you. And when he has a good game and it helps contribute to a win, then you're fine with it. But I am trying to serve two tracks here. I want the team to try to be competitive and win games, but I also want them to try to do that while developing Cam Thomas and while making sure the players you want to keep on this roster going forward. What we got here? Will Bridges become the glue for Brooklyn in time leader of the team? Will he be a leader of the team? Yeah. What happens when you move on from superstars and you're trying to reset the fun word we always use, culture, for your team. They said, we talked with, we saw interviews specifically around Bridges and around Cam Johnson. We talked with Nick Angstadt from Locked On Mavs about Dorian Finney-Smith. We know who Spencer Dinwiddie is, even in the short term. But Dorian Finney-Smith, high character guy. Everyone loves him. Great locker room guy. Cam Johnson, Mikal Bridges, Phoenix hated to lose them, not just because it takes away talent, but because they are very likable guys you can want to support. We played the clips from Cam Johnson last week talking about defense, coming over from Phoenix, learning, adapting, but being confident in being able to get over that hump, being dedicated. Friday night after the first quarter, we're not going to go down like this, right? They just, obviously, they bring a sense of pride. They bring a sense of a mentality that you can get behind. Yeah, of course. And, the funny thing is, we always talked about Kevin Durant. He's a guy that does it more on the court, right? He's a silent leader. He's not vocal in that way. When you're one of the best players in the league, you don't have to be vocal. And Mikhail, he led the post locker room after the Celtics win. Saw that clip too. Talked about, we're building a family. No joke. We are building a family here. Great win. When you are a guy trying to take your career and your game to that next level, it's about everything. And I'm sure when they brought him in, it was about, hey, we want you to be a centerpiece for this franchise. And that means everything. It means on the court, in the locker room, off the court, because we've now just had an experience with a lot of different things happening in it. And we don't want to relaunch into something like that again. So I'm excited to see how that goes. If anybody else has any other questions, I'm going to cut this one somewhat short. It's Sunday night. I hope everyone's enjoying themselves. Obviously, Brooklyn, 2-game winning streak now, can make that 3 against Houston on Tuesday night. And Doug and I will continue to talk about this conversation. This is Monday's episode on the podcast feed, but you know the deal. Tuesday, all throughout that day, you can hear us talk more about Mikhail, more about this team. So maybe that's a good overarching question. Do they think that this can be that guy that can be a leader for them? And I wouldn't be shocked if it's about the core of leadership for this team, right? Mikal Bridges, Cam Johnson. I mean, it's very easy to point to Spencer Dinwiddie with what he was in the previous iteration of this team and say, hey, he was a guy that was always galvanizing for a roster, right? So you got a lot of those good guys. But it is worth noting that when you look over this roster, the supporting cast members, like a Joe Harris, that's what he is, a supporting player to a team. He's never going to be one of your top 2 or 3 guys, or it shouldn't be anyway. Is the new players that were brought in here represent guys that can be leaders. Nick Claxton is still developing, still growing, but he was, the young player underneath the superstars. So all of a sudden moving him into that, and I think he can grow in that vein too. But all of a sudden thrusting him into that's a lot, right? That's a lot to all of a sudden heap onto him at 23 years old. Cam Thomas still developing, long ways to go. These are guys that have been in the league and understand the grind of season after season after season, and I think just bring the right attitude. So that being the case, you can, on Tuesday's episode, well, the post game, obviously, Tuesday night after the Houston game, but Tuesday we'll talk about where do these pieces fit in, what's repeatable, what can carry over here, and how does this team have success over the last 18 games, right? The bottom line is you'd much rather be having these conversations where, hey, some bad losses and some great wins. The Boston one is still, the comeback is far better. But seeing that you can be dominant over bad teams in the league is just a nice box to check, right? And I'll just highlight this one because I know people were, reminds me of a young Clay. I like that. I wasn't even going to that, Chuck, but there you go. Nice little comp there. I was just throwing up this one, talking about needing a young point guard, 100%. And, just the Trae Young conversation before. Again, the two ways you can do it is you can go out and get the guy and sacrifice a lot of assets if you think you're that close, or you can look at it as, how do we get that guy through the draft or a guy directly in free agency, facilitate and make that work, where we don't have to mortgage the future, we always talk about, and still be competitive, still have a chance to feel like, hey, our ceiling can continue to rise here over the next couple seasons. Remember, Cam Johnson, Mikal Bridges, 26 years old, just about to enter. This is where the prime starts, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32. So there's a 4 or 5 year runway coming up here when they'll be at the peak of their powers, and it's going to be about all those little moves that they make in and around them to fill out this roster and make it high competitive. So that's the case, my friends. I see questions about looking forward to free agency. We'll get into that, but that's 18 games and the playoffs away from being a conversation, and there's still a lot to learn here. And we'll talk a lot about Noel and what he's going to bring to the table. So as we always tell you guys, first of all, everybody in here, man, especially on a Sunday night, appreciate you spending some time with me. YouTube, podcast feed, always greatly appreciated. We'll be back again tomorrow, breaking down the new backup center, how that impacts rotations, and how this team can continue to be successful as they look to stack up a few more wins here down the back end of the season. Everybody be well. We'll come back in next time talking all things Brooklyn Nets basketball.